You never needed them to stay. You wanted them to. Sometimes you hoped they would, but you never needed it. And that distinction, that quiet, specific distinction, is something most people will never understand about you. There is a version of you that other people think they know, the one who shows up, who handles things, who doesn't make a scene when someone leaves or pulls back or decides you're not what they were looking for. They see that version and they think you're fine. They're not wrong, but they're not seeing the whole thing either because you were never just fine. You were something else entirely. You were built, maybe from very early on, to not require people in the way most people require each other. You don't know exactly when it happened. There wasn't a single moment. It was gradual, a slow understanding that arrived over years without announcing itself. People leave. People change their minds. People decide they need something different. And you learned not bitterly, not with resentment. You just learned that none of that was something you could build your stability around. So you stopped trying to. Think about how you move through your days right now. You wake up and the silence doesn't bother you. In fact, it's the part of the day you protect the most. Before the phone starts, before the noise, before other people's urgency finds its way into your morning, you're not hiding from anything. You're not recovering from anything. You just know what it feels like to start the day on your own terms. And you've gotten good at it. You don't fill every hour. You don't need the television on in the background for company. You don't reach for your phone because you're uncomfortable. You sit with things, you think. Most people can't do that. Most people cannot sit alone in a room with nothing happening and feel at ease. You can. That is not a small thing. Most men your age have never learned it. You also know how to end things cleanly, not dramatically, not with a long explanation or a conversation that goes in circles. When something is done, you know it's done. You feel it before you can even explain it. And you don't keep pulling at it trying to get a different result. Friendships that faded out, you didn't chase them. You noticed when someone stopped reaching out. You gave it space. And when the space became permanent, you accepted it. Not coldly, just clearly. Relationships that ended. You didn't negotiate your way into extensions. You didn't make promises designed to buy time. When it was over, you let it be over. Some people call that emotionally unavailable. Some people call it guarded. Some people have a lot of names for it. You've heard most of them, and at some point, you stopped caring enough to correct anyone. Here is something specific about you. You've been in rooms full of people and felt completely alone. And it didn't destroy you. You just noted it, cataloged it, filed it under things that are true about how you experience the world. You've also been completely alone, no one around for hours or days, and felt something close to peace. That asymmetry is something most people don't experience. Most people feel lonelier when they're physically alone than when they're surrounded by the wrong kind of company. For you, it's often the opposite. You feel your own absence in a crowd more than you feel it in solitude. That's not a problem. That's just information about who you are. You've also had moments, probably more than you'd admit, where someone wanted more from you than you could give. Not because you were withholding, not because you didn't care, but because what they wanted was a dependency you had no framework for. They wanted you to need them back, in the specific way they needed you. Equal weight on both ends, a kind of emotional symmetry. And you couldn't manufacture it. You tried, maybe, in earlier years. You tried to perform the kind of need that was expected. You said the things that seemed right. You showed up in the ways you were supposed to, but at some level they could feel it wasn't the same. And eventually, most of them left. And here's the part that matters. You survived every single one of those departures. Not because you didn't feel anything, but because your foundation was never built on them being there. You've probably been called independent, self-sufficient, low maintenance. Some people mean it as a compliment. Some people mean it as a quiet complaint, dressed up in neutral language. Like your self-sufficiency is an inconvenience to them. Like the fact that you don't fall apart without them is somehow evidence that you don't care enough. You've had that conversation more than once. You know how it ends. Here's what's actually happening in a man like you. A man who has spent decades developing a relationship with himself that is stable enough to not require constant external reinforcement. That's not a personality flaw. It's not avoidant attachment in the clinical sense, though people who don't understand it will sometimes call it that. It's something that develops when a man learns, early enough and clearly enough, that the only reliable constant in his life is himself. That lesson doesn't come from nothing. Some men learn it because they were responsible for things too early. They were the steady one in an unsteady home. They couldn't afford to need people because needing people meant things fell apart. Some men learn it through repetition, through caring deeply and watching it not be enough, through investing in people who eventually left or changed or decided to move in a different direction. Some men just have a fundamental orientation toward autonomy. It's in their architecture. It was always going to be part of how they moved through the world. The origin doesn't matter as much as the result. The result is a man who has developed a very specific internal economy. His energy, his attention, his emotional bandwidth, these are things he manages carefully. Not because he's calculating, but because he learned that spreading those things too thin cost him something real. Men who've built their lives this way develop a particular kind of attention. They notice things other people miss. They observe. They watch how someone behaves over time, rather than taking their word for who they are. They don't trust quickly, but when they do trust, it's based on actual evidence, on patterns, on consistency over time. That attention, that careful, patient observation, is not suspicion. It's intelligence applied to relationships the same way it gets applied to everything else in their lives. They also develop a very clean sense of what they actually want, not what they're supposed to want, not what looks right from the outside, what actually fits the life they've constructed, the solitude they've learned to inhabit, the routines that sustain them, the specific kind of company that adds something rather than subtracts. And because they know that clearly, because the signal is clean, they cannot pretend the wrong thing is the right thing. Not for long, not convincingly. There's something else that happens in men who've lived this way long enough. They stop orienting their lives around the possibility of someone staying. That sounds stark, but it isn't pessimism, it's precision. They make decisions based on what they actually want their life to look like. They structure their time around what sustains them. They invest in things that don't require another person's participation to have value. And slowly, without meaning to, they build a life that is complete. Not in a resigned way. Not in a way that says, I gave up, and this is what's left. Complete in the way that something well-built is complete. Solid. Proportioned correctly. Serving its actual purpose. That kind of life doesn't need anyone to make it valid. It already is. Here's the reframe most people around you have never offered. The thing that looks like emotional distance is often emotional precision. You're not shut down. You're selective. Those are not the same thing. A shutdown man doesn't feel. He's disconnected from his own interior. He moves through relationships like he's waiting for them to end. He's not present. He's performing absence. That is not you. You feel things. You notice things. You have a rich and specific inner life that most people never get access to. Not because you're hiding it out of fear, but because you've learned that most people don't know what to do with depth. You've offered it before. You know how that usually goes. So you hold it, not out of protection, out of accuracy. You've learned what actually fits, and you've learned what doesn't. And you've gotten honest enough with yourself to stop trying to make the wrong things fit. The man who never needed anyone to stay is not a man who never wanted connection. He's a man who figured out that wanting something and requiring it are two entirely different states. You can want someone in your life without reorganizing your entire existence around whether they remain. You can care about someone without making their presence the condition of your stability. You can love people genuinely without needing them to be the thing that holds you together. That is not emotional poverty. That is a very specific kind of maturity that most people spend their entire lives chasing and never quite reach. Most people build their sense of self around external confirmation, around who stays, around who chooses them, around whether the people they care about care back with equal intensity. You stopped doing that, probably earlier than most. And the result is a man who cannot be destabilized by departure. Not because he feels nothing, but because his foundation was never built on someone else's decision to stay. That kind of self containment is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is wanting connection and not having it. It has a specific ache to it, an absence that registers as loss. What you often feel is something different, more like sufficiency, a quiet sense that what you have, your thoughts, your time, your space, your interior life, is actually enough, not a consolation prize. Enough. The distinction matters because the world is very comfortable calling your kind of life lonely. It fits a narrative that is easier to process. The solitary man who secretly wants what everyone else wants but can't access it. That narrative is wrong for men like you, and you've known it was wrong for a long time. You're not a man who failed at needing people. You're a man who learned what he actually needs and built accordingly. Not everyone gets to that. Most men spend their lives either running from solitude or drowning in it, terrified of quiet, filling every gap, measuring their worth by how surrounded they are. You moved through something different. You sat with yourself long enough to actually know who you are, to know what you want, to know what you can give and what you cannot, to know the difference between what you desire and what you depend on. That's not nothing. That's actually rare. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to defend it. It's not loneliness. It's not emptiness. It's not a wound that never healed. It's just who you became when you stopped needing anyone's permission to be exactly that.